Hello everybody, welcome to Chop and Brew. I am Chip Walton. You are in the Chop and Brew HQ, aka my home office and edit suite. This episode is a long time coming. I shot it in mid-October 2013 when I was invited to the City Brew Off in wonderful Nashville, Tennessee. It's a homebrew competition hosted, organized, and coordinated by the City Brewers, a great homebrew club based out of Nashville. Part of the weekend festivities and events included what you're about to see here, which is a presentation, that's putting it strongly. It's more an off-the-cuff Q&A and discussion with John Kimmich of the Alchemist in Vermont, also known for Heady Topper. Probably most known for Heady Topper. But what John proves throughout this hour-long discussion is he is much more than one beer. He is trials, tribulations, and triumphs of craft brewing and over nature, as you'll see. He discusses in the first half the nuts and bolts, some history. You're going to pull some really interesting experiences. The second half, he kind of takes the reins off and opens the floor to homebrewers. So you're going to hear a lot about raw materials, technique, processes, and even some fun facts about John Kimmich's regular old life. So, couple of infrastructural notes about it. The beeps, the cuss words are beeped. That is kind of protocol in general at Chop and Brew, but John Kimmich also requested it. He does keep it real, but we also want to keep it clean. I know a lot of you guys have kids, a lot of you guys and gals have kids, and you've thanked us for that kind of thing in the past. Also, we're having some audio issues due to some interference with the wireless mic system in the room, so from time to time, there's some slight static hits, and but nothing too bad and nothing worth not putting this video out. It's great information. It was a great experience. It was awesome to meet John, talk about craft beer with them. I even got to judge some sour beers with them the following day. So overall, great dude, great information. Let's follow him down the rabbit hole that is a bunch of homebrewers lobbing questions at you. See you on the other side of this long video. Watch it in segments if you have to, but definitely watch it. All right, chop for chop, brew for brew. See you on the other side.
Yeah, I tend to do, if I do stuff like this, I like to do it a little low tech. I'm not really big into presentations. I've been to enough presentations in the brewing world that make my eyes glaze over. That why should I just get up here and talk about what I want to talk about? I'd much rather just do Q&A. I mean, you guys are the ones that brought me down here. I don't want you to walk away with any questions. I will be glad to answer whatever I can answer. You're first on the list.
How much did you put the D-bag thing on the can?
Not much. My mom, she didn't like it so much, but whatever. Yeah, no, you'd be amazed how much people accept that. And the whole idea, if anybody doesn't know what he's referencing, you'll see it when you get on the can there. So what I'd love for you guys to do, there's a way I like to open these beers. And if you're the person that has to share the beer with whoever gets to open it, you might not like it. But I like to put your hand right over top like that, put your nose right in that hole, and take that sniff when you pop it open. It's well worth it. It's very nice. So on the back of the can, you want to hand these out, or should I just?
Absolutely. Well, either way.
You guys can. I guess it's two people per can. But on the back of that can, it says, "Don't be a D-bag. Recycle this can." And there's a very good reason for that. I find that a lot of people need that little kick in the ass to do what the right thing is. And you know, it's like you see on every package in the world, please recycle, and nobody reads it. It's got to be something a little bit shocking and maybe a bit offensive to get you to actually do it. And I find it works. I mean, I can't tell you how many people will not throw those cans out. They will make a point of recycling it, and that makes me happy that they do that. I guess I should just start with like a little bit of background on the Alchemist. November 29th is actually going to be our 10th anniversary. I just got my Christmas goose early. So when I talk about our 10th anniversary, that is the anniversary of the day that we opened our brew pub in Waterbury, which no longer exists. In August of 2011, when Tropical Storm Irene came through, flooded the town of Waterbury. The brewery was one of the casualties of that flood, and within about, the flood happened, everything was destroyed. It was a horrendous occurrence, but about 2 months into the rebuild is when we got the wonderful news from our insurance company that they were gonna screw us, and that was it. They said anything that was in the basement, we know you've been paying flood insurance for the last 8 years, but anything that was in the basement isn't covered. And this was after they told us to catalog every single item that was in the basement, and we stood there and we wrote down serial numbers, everything. 2 months later, we're waiting for our check, and they're like, tough shit. If it was in the basement, it's not covered. 90% of what we lost was in the basement. So at that point, we realized we will never get insurance to have a brewery in the basement. The basement is the only place to put a brewery in that building, and that was the end of the Alchemist Pub and Brewery, which is a big bummer, But we owned the building. We ended up rebuilding it, gorgeous, and leased it out to a guy that we recently just sold the building to. So it's kind of a nice thing. He's got a great business going. He had a vision for it. It never really matched our vision, but it's still a great place. And so now he has taken it over, and that's just a past chapter of our life. While we were building what is currently the Alchemist Cannery, where we make Heady Topper, that is when that's when the flood hit. We started building in like January, flood hit in August, and literally we got flooded out Sunday night. Tuesday was our first canning run. So it was a mind-bendingly stressful time, but at the same time, it was just like, whew, If we hadn't been building that cannery, we would have been broke and filling out job applications after working all those years, and that would have really sucked. So, coincidence, fate, whatever the hell you want to call it, when we decided that we were going to start another brewery, it was because Heady Topper, from the day I started making it, I first made it about 3 months into the life of the pub, and there was something about it from day one that people just went nuts for. The beer itself, the presentation of the style, the name, everything. There's just something that clicked with people, and we would have been fools not to recognize it and to not take care of it. And so it was kind of a no-brainer, We had gotten so busy at the pub that it was as busy as we could get. We were full from the time we opened till the time we closed. We couldn't fit more people in. We couldn't make more food, and that was it. And we just kind of looked at each other like, are we going to do this until we're 80, and this is it? So that's when we decided to go for it and open the cannery. The idea was to run them both in conjunction. I was going to brew at both places, which I don't know what the hell we were thinking. But, the idea, we opened up, we're making 1,500 barrels a year of Heady Topper, and that was our opening production level. We just had 2-year anniversary, and now we make 9,000 barrels a year of Heady Topper. So we have expanded that many times. We have expanded to that point, I don't know, what is that, 600% growth in 2 years, which is mind-boggling. We never, ever thought that we would be making this much of one beer. And it's crazy. We brew Monday through Thursday. We can Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We can 3 60-barrel batches, which is 24 pallets of beer, and it is gone by Friday afternoon. We have nothing to sell Friday night or Saturday while we're open. We're just giving away samples all day on Saturday, and then we're closed on Sunday, and it all starts again. We've gotten flack for that from people, which is kind of crazy, People are like, you need to make more, and it's like, don't tell me what I need to do. And so we do what we can, and we will never sacrifice the quality of that beer. I have a very clear vision of what I want that beer to be, and that beer is what I want it to be, and we will not change that beer. I shouldn't say that because I'm always playing around with it. I mean, I'll mess with the hops and try new things, but nobody knows. It's me and my brewers know, because we are so intimately involved in that beer. We know every tiny little change that comes along in that beer. But it keeps it interesting for us. But with that said, when you're making a style of beer like that, and you're only making one beer, how do you improve upon it? And really the only way you're ever going to improve upon it is the quality of the ingredients. And that's where we are now. Just this past August, I was out in Oregon. I'm building all these relationships with growers, and I am going to have my own private acres in Oregon that are going to be the hops for Heady Topper. We're going to have like 30 to 40 acres of hops that are exclusively for Heady Topper. So aside from it being just the highest quality hops that we will be able to get, that just about anybody will be able to get, as the beer gets out there and maybe other people are trying to replicate the flavor of the beer, even if they use the exact strains of hops that we have, it will have a certain terroir of flavor that comes from those fields. You know, I mean, Simcoe's grown in Yakima and Simcoe's grown in Willamette can be two very different creatures. And so eventually that beer will have a flavor that you can't replicate it. And that's what we're shooting for. And to constantly be improving it. And how can we make it just a little bit better and just, you want to drink it even more. So at this point, I don't know if we're ever going to make more Heady Topper. People ask us all the time, are you going to expand? When's the next expansion? And you know, we've kind of thought maybe we would bump that to 12,000 barrels, but if we did, the only reason would be so that we don't run out. So that our retail room, we actually have beer when a customer comes through the door, they're not walking away disappointed. That's the reason we always have samples for people, because we don't want somebody coming in that they're just so looking forward to it, and they get there on a Saturday and it's like, tough, we don't have beer, you know, and then they would walk away and just be pissed at the Alchemist. And so at least you can come in and you get your samples and you can taste it right at the source, and you can't really complain about that, I guess. But that beer is a culmination of 20 years of an obsession with hops. I mean, hoppy beers grabbed me from day one. And I remember the first, well, I mean, you can't really call it hoppy beer. I mean, Bass Ale. Back in the late 80s and early 90s when I had Bass, it was like, woo, that is a hoppy beer. But now, if you try Bass Ale, Jesus Christ, there's no hops in this beer at all, you know? And, but it's funny how your palates change like that. And you know, it's like Vinny out at Russian River coined the whole phrase, that lupulin threshold shift, and that is a very real thing. I mean, your taste buds become accustomed to a flavor profile, and then that is your new standard, and then you start comparing everything up against that. The first truly hoppy beer I ever had, I gave away. It was a Bigfoot in 1991, maybe. And if memory serves me correctly, Bigfoot originally was like an 11% big beer. Now it's like that 8 to 9%. I think they dialed it back at some point. But boy, when that beer was first released, my God, that was just like it turned your brain to mush, you know? I mean, it was so big and malty and hoppy and just over the top. It was this complete shock to my system. I was incredibly high when I had it that first time. So it was really a shock to the system. I was just super thirsty and I wanted something quenching, and that was not it. But it grabbed me right from the start. And I went back and I got it again because I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I knew what I was getting into. I was like, all right, don't pour me a pint of this. Pour me a little glass, and I'll have a couple of little glasses. But I think really that's where it all began. Soon thereafter, I graduated from college. I went to Penn State and got a business degree. And I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be my own boss. I learned at an extremely young age that I did not like people telling me what to do. And the only way that's ever gonna happen is if I have my own business. So, you know, I'm going through college, taking business classes, taking the bare minimum in my major, but just taking a broad-based business education with the hopes that some lightning bolt would strike me and I'd figure out what the hell I was gonna do with my life. And thankfully it happened. I went home for a weekend, and my brother-in-law had an old dog-eared copy of Complete Guide to Homebrewing, you know, Papazian's book, and it just, I saw it sitting there, I picked it up and started flipping through it, and I was just like, man, I was fascinated by this. So I asked him, he used to brew back in the late 70s, early 80s, all these memories of him and his friend Stu, exploding bottles and just terrible, terrible beer, you know, everybody hated their beer. But I said, can we make a batch of beer? And so he said, come back in 2 weeks, I'll have all the ingredients. Well, 2 weeks later, I came home from school again, we made a batch of porter, and that was it. Something turned on in my brain, and everything just kind of came together, and I was in that last, like, well, it took a little longer than 4 years to get out of school. So it was like that last year of school where I had focus on what I wanted to do. And then it was just a matter of, all right, well, how am I going to get into the business? And I was able to save up about $3,000, and I bought an old Subaru, and I packed everything I had in it, and I moved to Vermont. And I went with the intention of meeting Greg Noonan and asking him for a job. I was working at a homebrew shop at the time in Pittsburgh, and it was like graduate school for brewing. You know, I was getting paid like $4.75 an hour, which was rough. But my boss had this amazing library. Every issue of Zymergy, all the books, all the magazines. I mean, these original Zymergys were like stapled on the top corner. I mean, these were like flyers, you know, but all of them. And so it was fascinating. I would leave work with a stack of this, a book, go home, plow through it, bring it back in, change it back in, take the next stack home. And so for like almost a year, that's all I did. I was brewing at home. I was just reading and studying and teaching myself how to do it. So when it was time to finally, I was like, all right, I can't do this anymore. I got to go work at a brewery. And so that's when I went to Vermont, and literally I walked into the 7 Barrel Brewery, which is in West Lebanon, New Hampshire. And this was Greg's second brew pub. They had just opened maybe like 5 months earlier. Their first brewer totally dropped the ball. Contamination problems, like right out of the gate they had these issues. When he hired on his new brewer, Paul White, who has since passed on, which is another bummer, but totally different story. His first day brewing in that brew house was my first large scale batch. It was a 7 barrel, beautiful decoction system. I mean, just this kick-ass 3-tier gravity-fed system. If anybody's ever been there, I don't know if you have, but it's a gorgeous brew house. And his first day was my first day, and man, it was it was ridiculous. I mean, I can remember his hands were shaking. He's so nervous. I mean, we both were. You know, he overflowed the liquor tank. Water comes pouring down everywhere. But for the next year, I was a waiter at the brew pub, and I would go in on my days off, and I would brew with Paul for free. And I did that for a year. I mean, every weekend, that's what I did. I'd go work more, you know. And after just about a year, it's ironic, it's another one of those like coincidence things. Right when I was feeling like I had learned what I was gonna learn there, and it's time to move on to that next step, that's when Greg, one night, takes me outside to, well, you know. And so we're hanging out, and he's like, so I got this job, you know, I'm thinking about doing this little project, but I'm gonna need a brewer at the Vermont Pub and Brewery. My brewer's leaving, he's opening up his own thing. Would you be interested? And I'm sitting there just, you know, in my pants. And I was so proud of myself because I was like, I'll let you know tomorrow. Let me think about it, you know? And I get out of the car just like, oh, holy shit, I can't believe I remember I got home, my roommate, we're sitting there, we're doing shots of Bushmills at 3 in the morning. I was like, God damn, he offered me that job. I can't even believe it. What am I going to do? I was like, I'm taking it. I got to take it. I'd be a fool not to. So the next day I went in, I said, I'll take it. I'll do it. And I was 23 at the time. And it's crazy. Like when I look back, it's like that I don't know what the hell he saw in me, you know? I'm just this stoned out 23-year-old kid that loves making beer, and he gave me that chance, and man, I just ran with it, you know? And it was a crazy experience. I came into that brewery, it was a disaster. I mean, the tanks, God, there was beer stone that was like brown in these tanks. It had been, I don't know how long it had been since somebody had like gotten in there and actually cleaned all this up. My first 6 weeks were literally, when I had a Grundy empty, I would lay that thing on its side, take the top ring off, and get in this thing with stainless scrubbies and acid phosphoric and scrub these things out and get all that stone out. It took me forever. And then finally, everything was clean. It's like, all right, so now we get after it. And it was this amazing learning experience. He was a fantastic boss. Any question I had, I could sit down at the bar, ask him anything. And he was like a walking beer encyclopedia. So all these things that I'd been reading and that just wouldn't really make sense in my head, I could sit down and ask him, and he would really explain it to me. And it was a fantastic way to get into it. You know, a lot of people find different ways into the brewing industry, but I'm still convinced there is no better way to do it than that. I mean, you gotta dive into it. You can't just be at the fringes and think you're going to be a success, because you're going to set yourself up for failure. You need to commit, and you need to be willing to make next to nothing just till you learn what you need to learn, till you can actually take that step and go for it. I mean, I would have 10, 11 beers on tap there 7 days a week, and I was getting paid $8 an hour. I was making $16,000 a year to have all these beers on tap. And it was like almost a year later, I was like, Greg, I need a raise. All right, you got $9 an hour. It's like $18,000 a year. I'm climbing up, you know. But that's where I met my wife, at the Vermont Pub and Brewery. And it's funny, just a couple days ago we were talking about, because we were driving into Burlington reminiscing about it. And literally she had left in October to travel in Europe, and I showed up in November. So we just missed crossing paths. I was working there a couple months. She came back in like February or March. And I mean, just like that, first time I ever saw her, it was just like, I knew it, you know? I said, this is the one. And I asked her out, and she said, no. And so I played it all cool. I was like, all right, that's cool, you know, all right. All right. And like 2 weeks later, she asked me out, and then that was it. And I think we were engaged like a month after. But I'm bringing this up because she is the only reason we're in business right now. If the business is in my hands, we would have had this big bright flash and then just, and that would have been it. People would be like, oh, you remember those great beers that they made at the Alchemist for 9 months until they went out of business, you know? But it's true. I mean, and the point is having the right people with you when you do that. I mean, I can't stress how important that is. And we're very lucky that we are a couple and we have that same focus and we have that same passion, and we complement each other very well, because it is a very tricky thing. Anybody that has their own business, you understand, having partners, it is like marriage, you know? So if it's your best friend that you're doing this with, you better be ready to have all those ups and downs that you can't step away from. It is the commitment, just like marriage, you know? I mean, it's a tricky thing. But you have to have that stuff, you know? I mean, there are so many factors to running a successful brewery, and so many times when something would happen, or a conflict or a problem, and I would my reaction would be like, you know, bull through a china shop, and she'd be like, oh, no. We're not doing that at all. We're going to do it like this. And it's like, no, we're going to do it like this. No, we're going to do it like this. And I'd be like, all right. We'd do it that way, and everything would work out perfect. And then it'd be like, whew, man, am I glad we didn't do it the way I wanted to do it, because I would have really messed everything up. And so we left that Vermont Pub and Brewery. We traveled around the country. We moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, There was a little brewery in Wilson called Otto Brothers Brew Pub. Their claim to fame is inventing the growler, which I've read other places. I'm not entirely sure that's true, but I think it is. But it was a tiny little place. They had a 15-barrel brewing system that they were doing extract beers on. And when I came into that place, I drank those beers and it's just like, oh, these are awful. You know, it's like there's so many things. And then I'm watching how they do it, and it was just like, having been taught by Greg, it was making my brain short circuit. I'm watching this going on and on. And I had to be very delicate because the guy that was brewing at the time is actually a good friend of mine, and he has his own brewery now in Victor. And so I was brought to grow that brewery, expand it. They were moving into Victor, Idaho, up over the Teton Pass, putting in a 30-barrel brew house. I had to convert all the recipes to grain, redesign everything. We laid out the brewery, bottling line, the whole works. We did that for a while, and again, that was like going to school on how not to do things. And in retrospect, at the time it was so difficult, you know, I mean, my boss was a very passive-aggressive guy, and I am the opposite of passive-aggressive. And I really clash with people like that. I'm the kind of person where it's like, if you got something to say, just say it, because I'm gonna say it. I can't hold this in, I gotta say this, you know, so don't get offended. And so it was a great experience. We learned a lot of mistakes to avoid, you know, and this was all just being filed away. We're huge foodies. Anytime we go to a brewery or a restaurant, we are constantly analyzing stuff. Her so much more so on the service side of things, me on the beer side of things, and we were just always thinking about this. We're always kind of planning our own place in our minds. Came back east. We lived in Boston for a couple of years. We almost opened the Alchemist in Boston. We were looking at sites in like downtown Boston. We were in neighborhoods in Boston. And I don't know if it's the reason, it certainly was a small part of it. That's when 9/11 happened and we were in Boston, and as you all know, Boston, blah, blah, blah. It was this shocking moment where it kind of forced us to step back, be like, Jesus Christ, do we really want to live in this city for the next huge chapter of our lives and have kids and be city people, you know? And that's when we were just like, we got to get out. At the time, anytime I wasn't brewing, I was working in hotels as a bellman, which is one of the most degrading goddamn jobs you can ever have. But you're getting cash tips, you're not waiting tables, you're not handling food, but you're dealing with rich douchebags that are like throwing you their bags and not tipping you. So again, it's one of those jobs, it's like this humbling experience where at the time I hated it, but now looking back, it's like those are the experiences that if you're gonna be a restaurant owner, you have to be humble like that, because you can't just tell your customers to shove it up their ass. You gotta like, all right, you're right, you know. Granted, once you gain a certain amount of clout, that's when you can tell them to shove it up their ass. Because you're like, whatever, man, there's 100 people waiting to get in here. Go, next, you know. But again, it was a very important step in our process to getting where we ended up. When we came back to Vermont, my wife is born and raised native Vermonter. I transplanted from Pittsburgh, and go Pirates next year. And so we came back to Vermont, and God damn it if I wasn't a bellman again. You know, I was working at a hotel, Jen's working in a restaurant, but now we felt it. You know, it was like, we're not gonna just drift. And that's the fear that was always in my mind. I had friends that had been in the brewing industry, and now they're like blowing glass or doing this or other artistic things, and it's like, that is not gonna be me, that cannot be me, you know? And so it was a very motivating thing. And finally one day, I mean, we're both working 2 jobs, we finally found the location. The moment I walked into this space, it was like, this is it. Like this, in my mind's eye, this was what our pub was gonna look like. Like a 160-year-old building, big, high, vaulted ceilings, the wainscoting, just the hardwood floors, everything. So it was this beautiful, fantastic place that we worked our ass off to build. I had quit my job. I was full-time construction, That was in August. She quit her job the end of September. At that point, there was no money coming in, and money is just like going out. And we're scrambling and working and trying to get it up and going. And so it wasn't until November 29th that we actually had that opening day. And literally, I think we had like $30 in our bank account that Thursday night. It was Thanksgiving. Just like this year, the 29th is the Friday after Thanksgiving. And we're sitting at the pub, and our friend Jeff, who was our chef, you know, it was just he and his wife and me and Jen, and we sat there, and he's making dishes, and that was our Thanksgiving dinner. And it was like, you know, cheers, if we're not busy tomorrow, we're all unemployed, you know? And, and thank God there were people lined up at the door our first night, and we're busy, and, you know, every month we got a little busier. Every year it was just like a ladder of growth until we kind of maxed that place out. And that brings me back to the beginning of the story, which is that's when we decided to open that cannery. Now, the sole focus is Heady Topper. You know, we had ideas of doing my other beers from the pub. I mean, there were 70 different beers that I did, which coincidentally, every recipe in the flood. Every hard copy, computer copies, gone. So it's all up here, safe and sound. A big rusty trap. But we're just now getting back into making some of my other beers. My goal with that is to keep that as fun and as much in the spirit of homebrewing as it possibly can be and still be a professional brewery. One of the things that happened at that pub over the years, I was the only one, nobody touched that beer. I did. 10 beers, 11, 12 beers, all the time, 7 days a week. If one of my mainstay beers was out, I'd get up, I'd come in at midnight to make sure I had that next batch racked and on. There was just something that I could not let that beer be gone for that customer. It was going to come in that next day. But working like that gets overwhelming. You don't even realize it. I mean, all of a sudden it was like, Jesus Christ, we've been doing this for 8 years. Seems like 8 weeks, you know? It's like your head is down, you're just working. One project leads to the next, and it is this never-ending wheel. And so in retrospect, that flood was like the greatest goddamn thing that could have happened to us. It was a giant financial kick in the balls, but at the end of the day, here we are with this thriving, fun business. And now we're starting to play around again, you know? So we're doing 15-barrel one-off batches. I don't tell anybody what I'm making. I don't tell them when it's going to come out. It is growlers only. We got one of those awesome Gruber growler filling machines. Has anybody ever seen those? They are sweet. You put that, so we got these stainless steel flip top growlers. I hard lined from the tank to the machine with stainless steel. There's no vinyl. It goes steel to a steel container, purged, counter pressured, flip that lid, out it goes. The first 15-barrel batch we sold in 2.5 days. Stood at that machine. Takes 53 seconds to fill a growler. And if you're fast, it's 53. And you just stand there, boom, 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 boom. And what is that, 20 hours of business, 900 growlers out the door, you know? And so it's crazy. I mean, with the popularity that we've gained and with the way craft beer is and with traders and people are like obsessive about stuff, it gets crazy. And how do you keep it from turning into a show when you release this one beer? How can you make it so that it's not people coming from 100 miles around and poof, it's gone, and then all your old pub customers are coming in and like, you had Holy Cow on tap and it's gone, you know? It's like, so it's a tricky thing that we're trying to figure out as we go along. How the hell do we have these beers and get that little word out? And so I think we've, you know, the first run went pretty good, and the next one's coming up sometime in the future. And that's our hope, is that stays fun and creative and exciting and never gets back to that grind of like, gotta make it, you know? And I remember being a home brewer, and I have a lot of friends that are home brewers, and that's the dangerous side of it. You have a kick-ass hobby. Do you want to ruin it, make it a job? You know, it's like, not everybody's cut out for it, and you might not want to do it because, again, there are things in life that you truly enjoy, and why f it up by putting all that stress on yourself, you know? I'm sorry about my language, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. I really want to answer questions from everybody. I would assume that you have a lot of questions, and I love fielding questions.
John, I love the way that you started to swoon when you were talking about the gravity-fed system. So what are you running right now, and are you finding some disparity between working, you know, in some of those earlier systems and the setup that you have now and the relationship with quality?
No, you can brew a dynamite beer in a trash can. Well, maybe not a trash can, plastic trash can. But it is so much your attention to detail, your ingredients, your water treatment, your process, how you handle it down line. That is the most important part. There are so many different brewing systems out there. Some are better than others, but as you get experience and you see what some of the pitfalls are, you see like, oh, well, the Vorloff on this, look, it just splashes down the side of the mash tun. It's like, that's terrible. You can't do that to the wort, you know? And so you have to have the knowledge of how to overcome the shortcomings of the equipment that you're working on and to keep those sound practices in place so that your equipment isn't affecting your beer in a negative way. If you don't know those things, you know, I mean, I've worked for breweries. We're like, oh yeah, that's how we do it. And it's like, really? Because you're just, look at all that foam down there. I mean, you're just whipping oxygen into your hot side aeration. Didn't you ever read that in any of your books? You know, but you'd be shocked at how many breweries out there do this shit because the guy that was before him showed them that's how you do it like that. And nobody ever came in and said, yeah, that's wrong. Don't do it like that. You know, the 3-tier system, like a homebrew system, it's nice because your pumping is to a minimum. It's certainly not necessary. Our hot liquor tanks are gravity fed. We do 3 consecutive brews a day, 4 days in a row. And so I have 3 dedicated hot liquor tanks that are full volume, designed for Heady Topper, so that gravity, the volume of water we need. They are set up with each with their own individual instant hot water heater, recirculation pumps, temperature controlled, so that you can fill your whole brew water, treat it, start mashing in, set your temp, heats it up to your sparge temp, and at the same time, as soon as you are shoveled out and you come to a boil, that's the signal. Batch 2 mashes in and their water's ready. So you're not using your kettle to heat up, you're not slowing the process down. And the idea is to take those 3 brews in the day and overlap them and compress that brew day down so nobody's working until 2 in the morning, you know. And so, you know, there's pluses and minuses to everything. No one set of equipment is right. You can make it do whatever you want.
How did you develop your own yeast? I mean, strain?
I didn't. The yeast that I use is the yeast that Greg brought back from England years ago. He opened the Vermont Pub Brewery in November of '88, and that beer's real name is VPB 1188. Conan is just kind of a nickname it picked up from Greg because of the way it behaves in a cone bottom fermenter. I heard somebody was talking about culturing it and using it, and they said that it doesn't drop out for them, and you're just not treating it right. But that's where it got that name, Conan the Barbarian. It was very aggressive yeast. And of course, when people hear that name, I mean, that sticks out. VPB 1188 doesn't quite roll off the tongue like Conan does. But no, that was Greg's discovery. He was in England drinking beers way back when. He found that yeast. He started using it. And he gave me permission to use it when I opened up the Alchemist, which was dynamite. I mean, I love that yeast. I've been using it for 20 years. I know that inside and out. I can almost tell you generations from the taste of that Heady Topper. And I can tell you when we're at the generation that it shouldn't be. You know, even in the 2 years experiment, at the pub it was different because, you know, I would take it through lots of different generations. At the Vermont Pub and Brewery, Greg never wanted it over 20. So that was just kind of the rule of thumb by his say. When I had it at the pub, it was like, well, I'm at 22, it still tastes great, I'm just gonna go, and what the hell, it's never been beyond 20, let's see what happens. So I took it as high as like 40. And what I found is that its flavor profile would kind of do this. It would ebb and flow, it would give you that apricot and all those beautiful tropical fruits, and then all of a sudden you'd have a couple batches, you know, it's not there, and then bam, it'd be back again. And so over years, you figure out those tendencies of the yeast, and now we don't go past 10. We hit generation 6, we reorder, we reculture. 10, we're back to 1. And that is the heart of that yeast. You get very little, you have this instead of this. You know, generation 1, a little different, but boy, 2 through 10 is just perfect. And then out it goes and start over again.
So you're still using the Conan yeast because in the
VPB 1188?
in the November issue BYO,
Yeah.
they mentioned that they talked to the brewers and that you guys were saying you weren't using the yeast anymore. That was the article.
Weird. I don't know where that came from.
No,
Actually, that was odd. I mean, because I had been talking to him about everything, and I don't know, I guess he just didn't ask me about yeast. But with that said, there are a lot of dynamite yeasts out there. They're not going to give you that exact profile, but damn close. I mean, there are other British strains from Y yeast, like British Ale 3. There's like a German ale yeast that will give you a similar character. But really, for me, that is the profile I'm looking for. I've messed around with different strains and I like them, but boy, I come back to that one because I love it.
Is there anything really special that you do to your water, and where do you source your water from in the first place?
I slaughter a virgin in every brew batch before I mash in. Yes. No, you'd be amazed how cheap you can get virgins nowadays. No, the water treatment, I cannot stress enough the importance of properly treating your mash water. I have countless homebrewers that bring me beer. I have professional brewers that bring me beer. Some are great, a lot are mediocre, some are terrible. I can pretty much pick out the ones that aren't doing it right. If you drink a beer that just kind of has this murky, ill-defined, it's not a bad beer, but nothing comes together. It's like, nah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I could drink that. But it doesn't pop. It doesn't have that beautiful definition of a well-made beer. Quite often, I'll ask the guy back, what was your mash pH? I don't know. It's like, how could you not know? What's your hardness levels? Whatever my water is. It's like, oh, Christ. There are your hardness, your chloride levels, your alkalinity, your pH. I use lactic acid to acidify. You have got to be hitting your mash pH. If you are not hitting between 5.1 and 5.3, you're at a disadvantage. If you're over 5.3, you are at a serious disadvantage. If you come in under, it's much more forgiving. You can have a more acidic mash and still have a beautiful, bright, crisp, nice beer at the end. If you're up in that 5.4, 5.5, 5.6, forget it. It's going to be a muddled piece of shit, And so I can't tell you enough how important that water is. Hardness levels. I've made my IPAs, like my house IPA at the pub was Holy Cow IPA, 5% session IPA, delicious beer. I took that thing from 100 parts per million, 250, 5, 750, everywhere in between. And it's amazing the difference that just that one factor will make on your finished beer. If you get too high into there and it's a small beer like that, you get a very blocky, minerally character. Anything over like 350 parts per million of hardness gets too minerally, unless it's the proper style. A hoppy beer like that, absolutely you can take it up to that and then some. You know, you'll hit a certain limit where you just can't really get your water any harder, that it'll precipitate out of there. But as on the other side of that coin is if you're making a Pilsner, what do you want your Pilsner to be like? Do you want it to be soft and graceful and smooth, or do you want it to be blocky, aggressive, and hoppy? You know, I mean, that is going to change everything. Brewing lager beer goes into extensive water treatment analysis, and I can't recommend that book enough to teach you that. Yes?
So, other than the Hazy book, what, as a fairly new home brewer, what would you suggest look at?
The oldies, that's a great one. Greg's lager book. The new ones, like the Farmhouse Ales book, that Wild Ales book. I mean, there is great information in a lot of these. And the more you read them, the more you will see the stuff that overlaps. And that's what you need to pay attention to and be like, oh, I read that in such and such. And then you flip that book open and you're like, oh, there you go. Huh, I'm going to try that on my next batch. You know, and it was interesting. And like, I think it was that one of those Belgian books when they came out, that was like, I don't know, 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, maybe. And it was just one little line in there, and he had mentioned the hardness, the 350 threshold, about the blockiness of mineral content and stuff like that, and it threw that light bulb, and I was like, you know, and I mean, I went right in the next day and I was messing around with that. You know, I mean, that stuff's gotta jump out at you and be an influence on what you do.
When did you realize what you had with Heady Topper, and what was the conversation between you and your wife, and you realized how good it really was and what it could be?
It took on a life of its own pretty darn quick. I was very deliberate when I opened that pub to ease into it, to tread lightly, because that town had never had a brew pub. These are all noobs that who knows what they're going to like. So I can't fly in there and start making all these hoppy beers that I want to make and have people just like, ugh, you know? And so I started out with a certain well thought out range. And once I saw the reaction to the Holy Cow and to other beers, it was like, these people aren't going to have a problem with hops. I'm doing whatever the hell I want now. And so I made Heady Topper. And I had this one customer, he had drank screwdrivers for the last 20 years. He said, I don't drink beer anymore. The beer that sold him was Heady Topper. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. That's the beer that is bringing you back into beer? It's like, that's the most aggressive hoppy thing, and he loved it. And it was that pink grapefruit and that citrus that reminded him of that. And so that his palate had already been geared to start thinking like that, and he just needed the right beer to kind of bring him into the fold. But I think what really clued it in for us is when we busted this jerk off that was coming into our pub, ordering pints of Heady Topper, going into the crapper, pouring them into a 22-ounce bottle, capping it, stealing our artwork offline, making his own labels, labeling it, and trading it, and saying, I bottled it. And we found him. We had to throw a relationship under the bus to get it, but we did it. And I found out who that guy was, and he came into the pub, and you have never seen somebody so apologetic. He thought I was gonna like throw him through a wall. But I was just having fun with it. Like, I know who you are, and I know what you did. You know, and, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It'll never happen again. It's like, you're goddamn right it won't, you know? And I think that was what kind of clued us in. It was like, I can't believe that somebody would do that. It's just crazy. And so we were throwing around the idea when we were at home, we're sitting there running numbers, like, could we even do this? Do we have the money to do this? Are we just idiots are we gonna stretch ourselves thin and like implode? But I did a batch, I hand bottled 600 bottles of it. It was a pain in the balls, but we did it all day long. Hand labeling, I personally filled with one of those fillers. that brass, oh my God, my hands were like claws at the end of the day from doing it all day. But we released that beer, and we didn't know what it was going to be like. So we announced 11 o'clock tomorrow we're going to start selling this beer. I got to work at 8:30, and there was a line down the sidewalk in a snowstorm, and it was like, holy this is for real, you know? And it was this big scene. It was so much fun. We gave away hot dogs. We had a DJ, man. It was just so much fun. And it was like, people were nuts for this. We'd be fools not to do this. You know, it's like we've got something here. And as business people, we certainly recognize that. And it's like, you'd be crazy not to do something. And then, I mean, when we started doing it, Jesus Christ, it's been crazy.
So you've talked a lot about the water and a lot about the hops, but what about the grain?
That is the next step. That is a much more difficult undertaking. I use all British malt. I use Pearl malt, Thomas Fawcett Pearl. And it's interesting. And now that we make just Heady Topper, it becomes more apparent of how important that is and how hard that is to control, because really when you're talking about those boutique malts like that, which really that kind of is, I mean that's a small region, but still you're talking about this farmer and this farmer's fields and this farmer's fields and these fields, and they're not taking that and putting it in a big mixer and putting out Thomas Fawcett Pearl. It's coming in lots, they're malting it, and out it goes. And so you might be getting a spring crop, fall crop, this region, this soil, this soil. One of the big things with Heady Topper is the clarity. Of course, hops throw haze to a beer, but most of the haze in that beer is derived from the barley. Beta-glucan levels will affect how hazy your beer is. And there are times when we'll be getting lots, we'll be pulling our barley and they'll be sending it to us, and it's that container that came over on the ocean, one of those big ass metal containers. And we'll have 5 weeks where it's like, you know, I mean, it's never bright. We don't filter it, we never would, but it's clearer, brighter. And then times where it's like, God damn, you know, it's like, this is murky, you know, but it always tastes great. But that's the side of craft that I won't let go. I mean, that's what keeps craft beer. And if you can't accept those slight variances and love those slight variances, then go drink some filtered piece of that's the same every time, you know?
Most of us blow off a little steam on the weekends by making some beer.
Yep.
What's John Kimmich do?
I blow off steam too. I mean, we live in Vermont. It is like the outdoor playground, you know? Gosh, mountain biking, snowboarding, swimming in rivers and laying on hot rocks, and it's all good stuff. It's fun. Outdoor exercise. I mean, now that we don't have that restaurant, I can actually like be fit and healthy and have time to do that stuff. I mean, when you're running a restaurant and you're at that grind, or any job where you're just working all day, it's pretty difficult to find time to go out and exercise and do all that stuff. And now we're fortunate to the point where I have that time. You know, it's like I don't have to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. I can come rolling in after I go to the gym and make sure everything's cool and talk and ask the important questions and make sure, put out fires where they need to be put out. And then it's like, all right, I gotta go get my son. He's coming home from school soon. So, I mean, now, I mean, our lifestyle is 180 degrees better than it ever was at that restaurant. We never had family dinners. One of us, I would brew all day and it'd be like, all right, you're here? Okay, see ya, I'm going home. You know, it'd be like this, pass each other and just work, and one day a week we'd all see each other. And now we get a lot more time, which is really nice. I mean, we were having conversations before, you know, like when people say, why don't you make more? You could be in every state in the country. And it's just like, well, yeah, we probably could, but to what end, you know? It's like, when is enough enough? If you're making enough money that you don't have to worry about your next paycheck and you have a thriving business, at that point, we don't want to get bigger. If we get bigger, it's just going to be not the same, you know? As we get bigger and we're more successful, our only goal is to spread that success to our employees. We have 25 employees now, and I think my job is complete when they all say they love their job. You know, when, you know, I mean, we go way above and beyond for our employees. I mean, we have worked for so many bosses and had so many crappy jobs over the years, and I will never forget that. Just like I always tell myself, I will never forget how it was to be a teenager. You know, it's like when my kid is a teenager, I will sympathize because I will not forget. It sucked, you know? And the same thing. I know what it's like to get up and go to a job. And man, here we go. All of a sudden you're standing there, it's like, oh, I have 7 hours and 58 more minutes of this, you know? And so I can't have jobs like that. I would not be able to sleep at night if I knew my employees were being used like that. And so we want to keep it the size that it is. It's bigger than we ever thought it would be. We want to just make everybody work less. You know, it's like if we get a new canning line in a couple of years, I mean, right now we can 27 cans a minute or something like that. When we can 60 barrels of beer, it's a long day. It's a 10-hour day. We do that 3 days a week. If we get a new canning line and make that big investment, it's not because I'm going to can 3 times as much beer. It's because I want to make that 10-hour day 3 hours. Go. Beer's canned. Go home. You get your salary. I'm not going to cut your salary according to your hours. You're getting your salary. I would rather see you have more time with your family because you're going to be a happier, better employee. When the goes down, you're going to be like, I'm there. I'm coming in. Man, he treats me so well, I'll do anything, you know? There's a lot to be said for that. There's not a lot of jobs like that.
There are more breweries in America now than we've had since prior to Prohibition. Do you feel like there's a bubble? And whether or not you think there is, how has that changed
Absolutely.
the way people work with small breweries these days?
You know, I mean, the whole nano thing is like the new thing, which is really cool. I mean, Sean Lawson's a perfect example. He started on a 1-barrel system. Now he's got a 7-barrel system. He's very much in the same line of thinking that I am. He could be making way more beer than he does, but he won't do it because he's got little kids. And he said, when they're out of the house, then I'll expand. And it's like, excellent, you know? But as for a bubble, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of breweries opening up, and where are you going to get your hops? You don't just call and say, hey, I'll take, you know, they're like, well, sorry, don't have it, you know? So I think a lot of people are kind of delusional on that side of things, you know, that's where the crunch is going to be, ingredients, you know, where are you going to get it? And you know, the discussion of mediocrity. The customer base is very educated nowadays. It's not like it was 20 years ago. You have 20-year-old kids that have been stealing Pliny the Elder out of their dad's fridge. They're not stealing Iron Cities, you know? I mean, there's this whole wave of a generation that is coming up being raised on craft beer, and it'll never be the same. You know, like when they talk about like, oh, 10%, I can't believe we're at 10%. It's like, are you kidding me? It's like craft is going to be 40%. The Pandora's box has been opened. You see all the big brewers themselves coming up with all these crazy things and trying to make pale ales and this and that. It's like they're doomed. They're doomed. There will always be a segment that likes that style of beer. I'm one of them. I drink cheap beer. I enjoy it sometimes. Sometimes that's all I want. I just want a simple, easy, you know. But man, they're sweating. And it's that double-edged sword, whereas there are more craft breweries, and then you get that pinch on the resources side of things. And the mediocre ones will disappear. You know, shelf space is tight, and if it's not marketing, it's quality.
So you use tons of hops in this beer, but what do you do with those hops?
I wouldn't consider it ton. I hear ratios that are much higher than what we put into Heady Topper. Heady Topper is total. I mean, especially on the dry hopping side, I hear crazy numbers. That we just don't go that high. I've messed around like that, but there is absolutely over hopping beers. Absolutely. I think it's more of the technique that we use to put the hops in. We have some proprietary tricks that are pretty cool, and they really pack that hop flavor in there.
Such as their proprietary.
We do not pump Heady Topper after it has hops in it. It does not go through a rotary pump. The shear of the impeller can affect the oils as they go through. Once it's in the whirlpool, we push it with gas everywhere. Gentle. You got to treat it with kid gloves. You want to chill that beer immediately. The longer it is hot after the hops have been oiled or have been added, you're going to start degrading it. If I could chill all 15 barrels of beer in 30 seconds, that would be the best. If you could hit that whirlpool, they drop, they settle, wham, and it's magically chilled, I wish, you know, but you got a 50-minute chill. You know, as you run that 15 barrels through the heat exchanger, there's no real way around that, you know, unless you have a gigantic tank of ice water that you can really pump it through fast, but it's just not really feasible. So there's limits on what you can do, but yeah, you want to whirlpool it, keep it closed. As soon as it is dropped and ready, go. And as for dry hopping, you're asking on days on dry hopping, I've heard all kinds of crazy things from people, like 2 weeks. You will pull horrible flavors out of hops if you put it on dry hopping too long. On average, 4 days, sometimes 5. Never more than 5. Never less than 4. Does that answer your question? All pellets. I do not use whole hops. I think there's a green flavor that you cannot escape with whole hops. And when I say green, I mean like the flavor of chlorophyll, that green matter taste. I do not boil hops in my kettle. I use CO2 extract as the main bittering in there for that exact same reason. I've done every combination you can dream of for hopping an IPA. I can't imagine you'd come up with a new one that I haven't tried. To eliminate that chlorophyll flavor, that grassy, that is the trick. Once you have a certain layer of bitterness in there, you don't need more bitterness. Too much bitterness and the wrong kind of bitterness, the astringency. If you notice when you're drinking this beer, those hops are mid-palate, mid-tongue, front tongue. It's not back there. If you taste bitterness back there, it's not bitterness, it's astringency. Quite often, guys over-sparge their malt. You know, I mean, the old rule of thumb was always don't sparge beyond 3 degrees Plato. If you start doing that, you start leaching tannins out of the husks of the grain. Heady Topper is way higher than that. If we were a corporate brewery, they'd piss themselves and be like, you're wasting money. And it's like, that's just not the way we look at it. Our last runnings are 5, 6 Plato sometimes. You could almost make a small beer from what's left. But you're taking the fat, you're taking that meat out of your mash, and that is your malt. You're not taking that stuff that might throw astringency into your beer. That's how you have that clean, beautiful bitterness in there. You know, I'm sure you've read, I mean, I read it all over the place, late hops, whirlpool hops. That is where you're going to get the density of the hop flavor. And like I said, once you have that certain level of bitterness, you don't need more bitterness. You know, everybody says, oh, 75 IBUs, you can't taste more than that. Maybe, but boy, I've tried many IPAs that are just too much too bitter, you know, and that takes away from the drinkability of it, you know. I don't want to be like, have that flavor in your mouth. You want that tasty, just like, next sip, you know. And it's so easy to drive all those volatiles. Think when you dump those hops in the kettle, it's like, boom, your garage smells like heaven. You don't want that. You want that in the beer, you know? And that's another reason I tell people to drink it out of the can. It smells dynamite when you pour it in there, but it's gone. You drink it out of that can, that doesn't come out until you burp it up, and those are the best burps ever, you know? I mean, you burp and it's like, that fresh hops comes out, it's great. Might still smell like kibasi, but it tastes good, you know? Or pizza, yes.
John, what do you miss most about homebrewing, whether it was the technique or the age you were and the things you hadn't been slightly exposed to at the time? What do you miss most about making it this call?
Being able to brew in my underwear, maybe? I don't know. I guess you just miss that newness, that discovery of it, you know, when you're just learning, and it's just, I mean, I still learn, you know, I mean, you have conversations with brewers and you always learn new things to try and this and that, but it's that introduction to it, you know, I mean, that was an exciting time where I was still totally clueless, but it was just that exciting, like, wow. You know, this new discovery that you've stumbled upon, and I mean, it's been around for 4,000 years, but new to me, you know. That, I don't really miss boiling wort over onto my stove or anything like that, no.
Do you ever get tired of brewing the same beer every day?
Do you ever get tired of having sex? You know? No, it's always fun, you know, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, to have that, it's a very satisfying thing, and it's probably the one true thing that I truly miss about the pub, was having that instant gratification of coming up, sweaty and exhausted, and you sit down at the bar, and man, everybody is just smiling, having fun. You've created this atmosphere where people connect, and you know, we didn't have a TV. We had one tiny little TV, and it's for all the goddamn Red Sox fans that had to see the game, you know, and that's the only time it would be on, was for something like that. Other than that, there's no TV, and it was on purpose, because it's like, it kills me to walk into a place and everybody's just like slack-jawed zombies watching TV, you know? It's like, that's the whole point. If you want to do that, do it at home, you know? And so that satisfaction of seeing people happy and creating that little glimmer at the end of the day when they've had some job. But no, I can't get tired of that, because I constantly have people coming in, and I mean, it's like watching kids on Christmas Day sometimes. They come into that brewery and you see the grown men just like, you know, just like, it smells so good in here, it smells so good. And it's like, good, excellent, you're welcome. No, I don't get tired of
the same beer. Did you do different beer, like go back to a pub or anything?
Well, I mean, that's why we're starting to play around with that other stuff, to have fun with that. But to get tired of making a great beer, no way. It's like asking Rodenbach if they get tired of making Rodenbach, you know, it's like, it's just this unique creation that I could never get tired of it, because it's so much, it means so much to so many people. These were canned on Tuesday. Yes. At about 10:30 in the morning, I pulled these off the line. It's funny you bring that up, it just makes me think of, you know, it's like even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people would have drank this beer and been like, that's green. You need to let that age. Now people are mental about it, where it's like, we put that beer in the can, it's 24, 25 days old. I never like it the day it goes in the can. Even the day after, it's not what it should be. It takes at least 3 or 4 days just to adjust. Every time beer moves into a new container, it adjusts to its environment, and its flavors change according to its environment. Just like going into a keg. I would fill a keg, you'd tap it that day, you know, boy, you tap it 2-3 days later and it's had time and it like blooms and becomes this different thing. I like it when it's like a week or two in, you know. I remember there was one of my brew logs, I would try it every day, you know, but I had 10 weeks. I just have that mental image. I had 10 weeks and I had circled it a bunch of time because as it ages and goes through this curve of development, at 10 weeks, it just becomes this, it loses that aggressive rawness and it gets this beautiful, graceful character. That aggressive edge dies down, but the fruit and the beautiful pine and the pink grapefruit really kind of come to the forefront. And I like it young too. I mean, that's kind of what's fun about it. You know, it's like I tell people that are regulars, buy your case and drink 1 can a day for 24 days. And you will be amazed at the evolution that beer goes through in just those 24 days. I mean, if it's a filtered, pasteurized beer, you just killed it. It's a dead product, that's product. In the can, and it's gonna taste that way 6 weeks from now. That is not. And that's, I mean, that's, you know, some people that would frighten them. But to us, it's like, that is what we want. We want you to be educated and have that experience. And like when I had regulars at the pub that would only drink 1 beer, I'd say, all right, this is right here. Today is a new batch. It's gonna last 4 weeks. Pay attention when you're in here. And soon enough, these guys would be like, this is a new batch, isn't it? It's like, yes, it is. Finally, you're learning, you know.
And there you have it, a good bit of the discussion and Q&A from last year's Music City Brew Off featuring John Kimmich from The Alchemist. Huge thanks to John for sharing his time and his knowledge with us, and especially for letting Chop and Brew document it and then share it with the entire world. Big props to Jen Kimmich for keeping The Alchemist afloat all those years and not letting John run it into the ground as he mentioned he might have done without her. Want to give big thanks to the Music City Brewers and the Music City Brew Off. We shot footage from the entire homebrew competition over that weekend. So one of the next couple episodes of Chop and Brew is going to be all about that competition, talking about what it's like to organize competitions, judging them, what's homebrewing in Tennessee like, and we're also going to attend a mini club night that went down the last night of the competition. I had a really good time there, actually. I met a lot of good people that I still like to keep in touch with. Speaking of people I like to keep in touch with, big thanks to all you supporters of Chop and Brew. The last couple of months have just been mind-blowing. More likes every day, more subscriptions on YouTube every day, more interaction on all the social media. A lot of support through t-shirt sales and sticker sales. You can get both of those things at chopandbrew.com. Click on shop. Or if you already got your t-shirts and your stickers and you just want to throw in, there's also a donate tab at chopandbrew.com. That is definitely keeping the show rolling. So your support is greatly appreciated. Until the next episode, whatever it may be, Nashville or in the garage, I want to say chop for chop and brew for brew. Thank to you. Cheers, everybody. See you next time. It's so simple, it's difficult. All right, here we go. This is it. Take 104.